Oh, hello. I didn't see you there. This is Kenji. Welcome to my show. I'm going to be cooking some katsu right now. Tonkatsu. Ton means pork. Katsu is Japanese pronunciation of cutlet, a shortened pronunciation of cutlet. Katsuretsu, cutlet. So this is what's called yoshoku in Japanese. So a foreign dish that has become a Japanese staple. So this is like a European style, the equivalent of like a schnitzel, but done Japanese style. So it's a different style of breadcrumbs. It's going to be quite a bit different from the way you would make a schnitzel. Not quite a bit different, but moderately different from how you would make a schnitzel. And this is one of those sort of staples of Japanese, both home cooking and sort of food court cooking. You'd find this like in the basement of a shopping mall very commonly. I'm starting off with the cabbage, which is the sort of traditional accompaniment to this dish, really finely shredded cabbage. So I'm using this mandolin, benrinner, Japanese style mandolin. Benrinner is the band, benrina, which literally translates in Japanese to, oh, how handy. Because it's talking about what you won't be if you're not careful with the blade. You won't be handy because you'll lose your hand, you know? Okay, so slicing very, very thin, basically as thin as this thing will go. That's about enough for me. I'm only making one portion today. Normally when I make Japanese cutlets, I would make more than one portion, but I only got one pork chop right now because I used up the others for some other stuff. So this is going to go into a bowl, okay, to which I'm just going to add some water. If you don't have a mandolin, of course, you can slice the cabbage by hand. But I find a mandolin is great for getting you those really, really fine shreds that you commonly see at a Japanese katsu shop. I'm going to add just a little bit of ice to here as well. And I don't know if you've watched my other videos where I do this commonly with scallions. You'll know exactly what's going on here. The ice water is going to seep into those vegetable cells and kind of plump them up the way, in the way that a balloon is taut when it is full of water. It is turgid as opposed to flaccid when it is empty of water. So we want our cabbage to be turgid cabbage, you know? Engorged, as they say. All right. So I've got this pork chop. This is a regular loin chop. I got one with a nice amount of fat in it. So the ton in tonkatsu, ton refers to pork. That's the Japanese word for pork. So similarly, like something like tonkatsu is a pork broth that you would use for ramen. So what I'm going to do with this, that's the same ton. So when my mom made katsu, she would take her pork cutlets or often chicken thighs, and she would marinate them with some sake and lemon juice and soy sauce. My grandmother actually used quite a bit of soy sauce in hers. It's not a very common thing actually in katsu to use those ingredients. Sometimes I do, but I'm sticking with just, right now this has just salt and pepper on it. So I seasoned it and then I left it in the fridge overnight as to act as sort of a dry brine. And what that's going to do is that's going to sort of partially cure the pork so that it holds moisture better when you subsequently cook it. And so my mom actually used a meat pounder, the kind that has like a heavy thing with a diamond pattern on it. And that would sort of rough up the surface of the meat while also getting it nice and thin. I don't have a meat pounder at home. If I did, I would use it, but I don't. So what I do is the back of a heavy cleaver like this. You could also do it sort of the tradition, the standard pounding way with the bottom of a pan. But what I find is that by using the back of a cleaver like this and kind of roughing up the surface, you get better adhesion of the breadcrumbs. There's this modern trend, by the way, for in katsu shops, both in the US and in Japan, to use really thick cuts of meat. So you might have like a fully, like an inch or an inch and a half thick pork chop that is not pounded at all, or a steak that's just breaded and fried. I personally prefer the thin pounded kind, first of all, because I think it sticks to sort of more the budget-oriented nature of the dish, of the home cooking, because it allows you to stretch out, use a lot less meat per serving because you get a lot higher ratio of the breadcrumbs and egg to the meat when you pound it out thin versus having a nice, really thick piece. Plus, I think it also just adds to the eating experience of it. I find the best katsu is similar to schnitzel, where it's pounded really nice and thin. Maybe it could be a little bit thicker than a schnitzel, but you know, really pounded to the point of complete tenderness. One of the big, you know, there's a couple of significant differences between Katsu and schnitzel. And I did this really deep dive into schnitzel for the New York Times, I don't know, maybe a year ago. I'll link to it below. But in doing the testing for that and in talking to lots of chefs for that, what I found was that, well, with schnitzel, the goal is to get the breading to kind of puff up, almost like a balloon, away from the meat. And you accomplish that, the main way you accomplish that, first of all, is by, well, people will say it's by agitating the oil a lot as you cook it. I found that didn't make as much of a difference. So the real thing that makes a difference is if the meat is wet before you start breading it, before you do your sort of standard flour, egg, and breadcrumb breading. If the meat is a little bit wet, that will help it puff more. And so in that recipe, I actually end up brushing the steak with a bit of liquor, which evaporates faster. It's more volatile, evaporates faster than the water, so it creates this kind of puffing effect, this really big sort of balloon-like puff to the coating. With Katsu, on the other hand, I always feel like the breading should be really nice and firmly adhered to it. You don't want that puffiness because the breading is a little bit heavier in some ways. You know, the panko is a lot thicker than the finely ground breadcrumbs you would use for a schnitzel. That looks about right to me. We could go a little bit thicker, a little bit thinner, but I'm not going to. So panko is a little different. Let me wash my hands real quick. Hold on. So panko is a little bit different to standard breadcrumbs in that it is sort of airier and larger flakes. It's made from a special kind of bread. The panko brands, by the way, they vary quite a bit in terms of the size and shape of the breadcrumbs. This is shirakiku Japanese style breadcrumbs. Shirakiku is pretty good. I can find it at my local markets, so that's mainly why I use it. I've found other brands that are better. I can't really remember what they're called though. There's a certain brand, I believe it's the Kikkoman brand, that you buy it, like you can find it like the real, you know, like an American supermarket. They tend to have these kind of weird, clumpy, thick crumbs that I don't like. So you always want to buy a brand where you can see inside and see that it looks sort of nice and light and flaky, as opposed to, you know, sort of more like wood shavings as opposed to clumpy. All right, so I got flour here. I've got breadcrumbs over here. The other ingredient is egg. I'm gonna take an egg, a touch of soy sauce, a smidge, a skosh. The word skosh actually comes from Japanese. Skoshi means a little bit in Japanese. And it got that turned into the word skosh in English. Anyhow, all right, so take my egg. I'm using chopsticks. You can use an egg beater, use a fork, whatever you want. You want it to be pretty well beaten because you don't, you really want like a nice thin coating of the egg to form on the cutlet. You don't want there to be sort of thick, gloppy egg or uneven egg. Pretty well beaten, okay? Now, as I mentioned, it is really important that our cutlet is nice and dry before we cook it, because we want that coating to really adhere. Oh, doing that back of the handle, back of the knife, you know, the spine of the knife, pounding thing also, you know, it makes it, it allows for better surface, better retention of the coating as well, better sort of adhesion of the coating. Okay, so it's going into the flour. I tested, by the way, for my book, The Walk, which is right here. I have a recipe for cutlets in there. For my book, The Walk, actually on Serious Eats as well, I tested a whole bunch of this stuff relating to katsu. And one of the big ones I was wondering was, why do we need to add the flour to it? Because if we're just adding the egg anyway, and the egg is meant to adhere, what's the point of the flour? And what I discovered, what I found in this testing was that the main reason you want to add flour is because it evens out any kind of sort of humidity issues within the meat. So if there's like a wet spot on the meat or a dry spot on the meat, it's going to cook a little bit differently when you get it in the fryer. The flour kind of evens that all out, so it sticks to the wet spots better, and it desiccates them. You know, so your flour coating is basically there to make sure that the meat is evenly dry across its surface. So we're going to shake it off, then into the egg mixture. If I was doing multiple cutlets, I would keep one sort of wet hand and one dry hand. That way I don't end up breading my own hands in the process and building up a real thick layer of coating on my hand. But I'm only doing this one cutlet, so I'm not too concerned about that. All right, so even layer of egg. And then straight into the panko. So one thing you don't want to do, and having owned and operated a restaurant that made schnitzel on a regular basis, and really tested this, you don't want to pre-bread your cutlets. You want to bread them right before you're ready to fry them. I'm using a combination of, I believe that's peanut oil and shortening in there right now. But you want your oil hot before you get your cutlet breaded. Because what happens is if it sits too long in the breading, if the breading sits too long on the surface of the cutlet, it'll start to absorb moisture and get a little wet. And if it starts to get wet at all, then it does not cook evenly. Some of it will brown really well, while some of it will stay pale, so you end up with this really spotty looking cutlet. The same thing happens if you don't do the flour step. You get a really spotty looking finished cutlet. So the key to really good katsu, make sure the meat is dried, get it in the flour, and then have your oil hot and ready as soon as you start breading your cutlet, because you don't want it to sit here in the breading too long. All right, so you see I'm getting a really nice, building up a nice thick coating by kind of flipping it and pressing it down into these panko a few times. Okay, and now I'm looking for an oil temperature of around, say, 350 degrees or so. Oh, we're a little bit hot. All right, 360, we're good. So, got my breaded cutlet. Give it one last turn in there. And we're going to go right in. You want to gently lay your fried foods into the oil, lowering them away from you. You don't want to drop them in so they don't splash, and you don't want to lower them towards you so you don't actually sort of accidentally send a wave of oil flying towards you. Okay? There we go, and I've got this little spider. Now with katsu, you want to keep it moving constantly because you really want a nice, even fry to it. So you don't want to let it sit too long in one place. And you do want enough oil in there that it can sort of swim in it. You don't want your cutlet pressing down against the bottom of the wok, for example, because then you'll get like a really big hot spot on the bottom and it might start burning on the bottom. So you want to have it moving. See where we're at? Give it a gentle flip. I might flip it once or twice. Okay, I'm going to quickly make a sauce here for it, by the way. So katsu sauce, at home we would have bulldog sauce, bulldog brand fruit and vegetable sauce, which I still have here often, but I ran out, so I'm going to make my own. So katsu sauce, my recipe for it is, I learned this from, we did this kind of sauce at Clio, a restaurant I used to work at, my old chef Ken Oranger. Couple tablespoons of ketchup, about a tablespoon of Worcestershire, and a little dash, maybe a teaspoon or two, of soy sauce. Alrighty. So notice mine does have this little kind of cup to it. If you want to prevent that, you can trim off all the sort of the fat and sinew in there, but I don't mind having it. Or either that, or you can make a little slit in it so that it doesn't contract and pull up into the katsu. But I don't really mind it, so I keep it. Mix this sauce up together. All right. So I go based on color. If I was doing a real big, thick piece of pork, you know, maybe I would temp it to make sure that I don't overcook it. But with these pounded cutlets that have been dry brined, you know, salted and let rest, they're going to be nice and juicy even at well done. Alrighty, katsu done. And let's check our cabbage. I'm gonna grab a salad spinner for that cabbage. Get a nice little pile of it. Give it a spin. Some of that centripetal force, pull the water off of it. All right, got a beautiful pile of shredded cabbage. Go right here. So typically you would also serve this with rice, but I'm not going to. In katsu, I always serve it sliced because we eat with chopsticks. Should we take a peek at one of these pieces and see how it looks? Oh yeah, nice and juicy. And you can see how well the breading has adhered. Yeah. Oh boy. All right, so I'm gonna finish it with some of this sauce. Maybe I'll do a little lemon wedge as well. Kind of classic accompaniment. Pretty classic version of Tonkatsu. Not quite the way my mom makes it, but pretty similar. All right, let's try a little bite or two. Mm-hmm. The tonkatsu is delicious and crunchy and juicy. And the cabbage is refreshingly turgid and sweet. All right. Guys, gals, non-binary pals, I will see you next time. Bye-bye.